Democratic Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez of California sits on the Homeland Security Committee, and Republican Congressman Brian Bilbray of California is a member of the House Immigration Reform Caucus. I want to get to this issue of birthing or birthers, because there's part of this legislation out there. They're basically going to say future presidential candidates, they've got to have birth certificates. But let's start with this general issue. Congresswoman Sanchez, what's wrong with a state trying to enforce a law the federal government never seems to get around to enforcing? They have 500,000 illegal immigrants in Arizona. The federal government has dropped the ball. Why shouldn't the state of Arizona pick it up and do the job?
Well, actually, the federal government has put more resources. Many of the law enforcement agencies in Arizona are under 287G, but what we find is that they're not very well trained about what the rights are of people. So the problem with a law like this is that, for example, I'm Hispanic, so if I go to Arizona, does that mean I have to carry a copy of my birth certificate and an affidavit and 14 signatures of witnesses to say that I'm an American citizen? How do you suspect someone looks like something? That is the problem with a law like that.
Well, what is the law? What would be a way that we could avoid all this and stop illegal immigration? Do you support the idea of a biometric ID card that's actually checkable, or not have a checkable ID card? Do you want a checkable ID card?
Well, I actually am one of those people that like the freedoms of being in the United States, and one of the things that we have always argued for was that we wouldn't have a national ID card. But again, I'm also a person who lives under an ID card here in the Congress. I live under a driver's license that's under the biometric ID for the future for California. So, I mean, I'm already using that if I want to drive. I'm already using that if I want to come into the Capitol. So personally, I don't have a problem with it. But there are a lot of conservatives who do.
Well, that's their problem. The fact is, you and I have to get on airplanes and show an honest ID card, and if it's not an honest ID card, it's fraud. Okay, and if we go to the bank and try to get money out and it's not us, it's fraud. If we try to check into a hotel and use a phony name, it's fraud. Okay, let's go to the other congressman. What about Arizona? Why do states try to get into the business the federal government is into, which is protecting us from illegal immigration?
Well, I think the same reason they're involved in the drug war, too, Chris, is that this is a community problem. It's not just a Washington, D.C. concern or just a border problem. This is something across the board. You imagine how successful we'd be in fighting the scourge of drug dealers if we just said, well, local government's not going to be involved. We're not going to allow the county and the cities involved. We're going to do this all just the federal government. And you know that it has to be a coordinated community effort across the board in any kind of enforcement effort. This is the basis of community enforcement.
Okay.
You know,
let me ask you a problem. Suppose you are a second-generation Mexican-American or from Colombia or somewhere, and you have an Hispanic look, your dark complexion, whatever. You may have something about you that indicates you are from that part of the country or that part of the world originally, your parents were. And a cop stops you and says, well, you have a mustache or something that makes me think you're Mexican-American or something, and he starts bothering you. Don't you think we're going to have a problem here with cops bothering people just because they seem to be Hispanic even though they're citizens or they have a green card?
Chris, that's why we have the policies that there are things that you indicate that even go beyond the color of your skin, the hair, that looks at the fact, the way you dress. My mother is an immigrant. I'm second generation on that. She speaks a little funny, but the fact is that the law enforcement is trained in this law. It specifically says you will have a pattern of activity or a pattern of indications that give you a justification to think there's reasonable doubt, not just the fact of somebody's ethnicity. So this one has in there, it's something that federal government does with local government right now. We have programs so that they are using these systems right now. The difference is the people of Arizona are doing this across the board rather than piecemeal in their state, and that's why it's being implemented. And it really isn't that big a leap, and it shouldn't be.
Let me go to the president.
Brian,
go ahead, Congresswoman.
That's just not true. In fact, one of the sheriffs there in Arizona is under FBI investigation because he hasn't followed the rules, and his deputies have not followed the rules. They haven't gotten the type of training that we give to our ICE or our federal agencies, agents that do this immigration issue. So there are quite a few. In fact, as sitting as the border chairwoman for over 4 years, one of the things that I saw was, discussion after discussion from law enforcement officers about how this wasn't followed, about how people were being pulled over without it, and the law, the language that could be signed into law by this Arizona government says you suspect them of being an illegal. What does that mean? You suspect them of being an illegal?
Chris, look, as somebody born and raised on the border, I've seen this my entire life. There is indications between legal residents and those who can be identified as being highly suspectable.
Like what? Give me a non-ethnic aspect that would tell you to pick up somebody.
They will look at the kind of dress you wear. There is different type of attire. There's different type of right down to the shoes, right down to the clothes, but mostly by behavior. It's mostly behavior, just as the law enforcement people here in Washington, D.C. does it based on certain criminal activity. There is behavior things that professionals are trained in across the board, and this group shouldn't be exempt from those observations as much as anybody else.
Here's John McCain with a new look. He was Mr. Immigration, but here he is on Bill O'Reilly. He has a different look right now. Here he is. Let's listen to John McCain.
The state of Arizona is acting and doing what they feel they need to do in light of the fact that the federal government is not fulfilling its fundamental responsibility to secure our borders.
But what about the racial profiling? You know that's going to happen. It has to happen.
I would be very sorry that if some of that happens, and I regret it.
Okay, Congresswoman, what do you think of John McCain, the new John McCain?
Well, I think he's obviously trying to win a primary where he's got a very conservative, person who's got some very strange ideas. I know I served with that person here in the Congress. I hope that John does beat him, and then John comes back as a senator and gets back to the issue of really being middle of the road here and helping us to push real and good immigration reform, because that's what we need. We don't need to be profiling people. We don't need to be going after people. We don't need to have local agencies deciding to take people off the street for whatever reason because they look like a suspect. We need good immigration reform here from the Capitol.
I love the way you give it so you don't mind. Let's take a look. Just so he beats J.D. Hayworth, that's all you care. Let me go to Congressman Bilbray first. You're a Republican. What do you make of the state of Arizona saying you have to have a birth certificate to get on the ballot next time? What do you think? This is ad hominem? Is this a bill of attainder, as we used to say in Constitution classes? Is this aimed directly at the President of the United States himself, Barack Obama?
No, Chris, actually, this is Arizona. This is really aimed at McCain, because there's been an issue with the fact that he wasn't born in the United States. Now, it's interesting that fact is he's qualified to be president. You don't have to be born in the United States, but a lot of people look at that. But because he was born in Panama, and the Panama Canal was not U.S. territory, it was U.S. area to be treated as if it's territory by treaty with Panama. So McCain's actually went through a lot of the same thing in Arizona.
But they're doing it now.
The issue was raised about his presidency.
But Congressman, they're doing it now. John McCain's not running for president anymore. He doesn't have to be native born anymore. He's an American, obviously. So the question is, why are they aiming it at the president of the United States now? Do you think it's personal?
No, I don't think it's personal. I think it's a way to avoid. I think all of us, Chris, everybody in elected office should be showing that we are a citizen and that we are. I think that the problem with this bill is that it should be universal to all elected officials. But I don't know if McCain is running again. Remember, he's been running every election since I've been a child. So I'm not so sure you can say he's not running.
Well, I can't either. But I'll tell you this: Barack Obama has shown his birth certificate to the world. He has shown documentation of his birth twice now from two different newspaper accounts, which were only written with the authorities participating in those announcements. They weren't just somebody putting out Christmas cards. These were announcements of somebody being born. We have all the records available from anybody who comes out of Hawaii. He has shown the records, and the birthers are crazy, and they keep raising this crazy issue. And now the Assembly of Arizona has joined the birther wagon and are behaving just as zanily as the birthers. Anyway, thank you, Congresswoman Sanchez, and